games that are happening where they're more player-driven.
Yeah.
Augmented reality.
Yeah.
Where the players are really creating the story, and the story is happening as players are. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Do you mean when you're talking about augmented reality? Do you talk about those games where like you have a camera and you're looking at the world around you and they
Exactly.
artificially put things in?
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay. I think augmented reality. I haven't seen most of those games yet incorporate a story. I've seen they tend to do objectives well, but I haven't yet seen one that does a story per se yet. So I would leave them in the realm of the open world games that I discussed before briefly, the Minecraft, the Sims, that sort of thing.
Sure.
There's stuff to do, but I'm not sure that they're telling a story quite yet. Have you had an instance where you've seen one with a story?
Yeah, well, we can talk about that.
Okay.
But I have a second question. So
Yeah.
now we have things like the Oculus Rift, right?
Yeah.
So we are obviously very excited about that. However, when we talk about your three types of gaming story, have you seen, I'm assuming you researched this or played on network, et cetera, have you seen any, I guess, negative reaction to having something where you have more of a branching story while using something like the Oculus Rift and what that does to a person psychologically versus more of folding story, because that's probably really important when you're that invested.
Right. So just to explain to those people who may not be up on gaming terminology, the Oculus Rift is we have essentially reached the point where you can strap goggles to your face and pretend that you're within a game. And so it's full virtual reality, and they've made it almost seamless at this point, which is kind of scary and awesome at the same time. And so, so I think that with the Oculus Rift or games like that, I definitely feel like the emotional level that you're connected to it would be way up, because you actually feel like it's not just I'm sitting in front of a screen and I have the controller. You actually feel like you're in the game. And so I would imagine the emotional level would be significantly upped. I think that if you're making a branching story with that, you just have to be smart about the decisions, because potentially things like death in those could be traumatic when you feel like it's actually happening to you. If you don't have a healthy distancing mental mechanic from like, I still have glasses strapped on, this is not really a thing. Because I know people played like an Alien game, a demo recently for that, and were just like terrified and had nightmares from it.
Yeah, I'm just curious if there's more, if it's just mostly linear games, or if you've seen it.
Again, I've seen mostly tech demos of the Oculus Rift, so I haven't seen it implemented into like a full game story yet set up. I'd say at this point I've seen a few linear games doing it, like the Alien Isolation or stuff like that. I think it would be really cool to have it try out the interactive stuff. I haven't yet seen them do that, but I also imagine that's only because the technology is a year old. It costs a lot to make the branching types of games, and so that could come with time. Yes?
So I just have a very general comment. Thank you. This presentation is super interesting.
Oh, thank you. I was terrified of
No,
it.
you did very well.
So because of the weird projector setup, I didn't have any of my notes here, so that's...
Oh, no, you did very well. So you also do English, right? So I'm interested in, my background's in philosophy and hermeneutics, right? The way in which we interpret stories is near and dear to me. I want to caution you using the word passive. Use the word passive a lot, right? Linear games are passive. The way in which we read books are passive. The ways in which we read stories are passive. I want to caution against that because I don't think they're passive. In fact, the way in which we interact with the story, the ways in which we project all sorts of things, right? The way in which you describe Mario is definitely your interpretation of that. Right? There's a very active presence going on there. And so I want to just have some pushback there, because perhaps these games aren't as passive as we think. And if in turn they are a little bit more active, I wonder what that begins to do with the threefold breakdown. I think there's potential article there, right, as a possible response to that threefold, right? I think you actually answered the point, is what I'm saying here. You have the critical tools to do it. Right? That is to say that perhaps this passive-active breakdown is in fact a false dichotomy. That everything is active, it's just different degrees of activity based on the way in which we're taking the story. Sorry, that's just
exactly. Well, I'm sure my English professor friends are like very excited with that comment over there. So I'm like, dang, I should have realized that.
You have the resources right here, ready for you.
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff going on with the way that you interpret story and that sort of thing, the way that you project into it. So that definitely is an area. I meant more as far as your ability to control the narrative, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Passively.
So if it's just simply about options, sure, but I think there's a lot
Exactly.
more going on than what you're telling me
Yeah, I
right
think
now.
passive acted in a certain sense
Mhm.
could apply here, but in other senses would definitely be a false
Yeah.
dichotomy. So,
Beautiful, thank you.
yes.
So you talked about how the style has to fit the story as
Yes.
a factor of game distribution.
Mhm.
But did you find anything about like just simple cost effectiveness too? Because if a game company knows that their users don't like branching any more than they do a linear, when it makes sense just to produce more linear games which are more cost effective and have a better profit?
I mean, that's probably why we have the current 75% to 25% break in the market. I think that some games could benefit. I do think that there is something to be said for the type of story that you're telling. And some people could start with, I don't have that much money, so I'm going to tell a story that is linear. I think what I would be concerned about would be potentially the idea that people start with this idea that they have to be linear in games. And I've seen a lot of independent game studios create highly branching or fold-back types of games. They just do them much shorter. So for instance, the Stanley Parable that I showed you that insane like graph for with like all the branches, top length of a story in that is 15 minutes. And so that's the way that they keep costs down, is they're like two guys working out of like a room or that sort of thing. And so instead of trying to make a 10-hour story that's this epic, like a Telltale game, like who did the Walking Dead one that I showed, they instead decided to focus on the branching opportunities, tell a story based around that, and then they just made the story limited to their resources. But I think that if you were trying to build a game to scale like that, like if you're like, we want to make a 10-hour game either way, definitely I think that there would be incentive to do a linear model for cost effectiveness. Other questions?
Any questions for Taylor?
That's it.
Please join me in thanking Taylor.
Thank